What is up, everybody? Welcome into Hoops 360. Very special day on the podcast. It's our 50th episode. Time flies when you are having fun. I promise that we have delivered for the big 5-0. We'll start off today's episode hitting some news and notes, some of the newsiest things that have come out of the league over the last week. We also catch up with Courtney Cox. She's an author and an expert on how race and politics and culture intersects the world of sports and of women's basketball, how we've seen that come to fruition in the WNBA. It's a lengthy conversation, but it is definitely worth your time. Highly, highly, highly recommend that you stick around for the entirety of it. So let's get into it. She is Cassandra Negley, the lead WNBA writer for Yahoo Sports. I am Caroline Fenton. Cass, we've had some clinching happening in the WNBA. We now have all 8 playoff teams that have clinched their spots in the playoffs. Right now, what you're seeing in the seeding as of today, Wednesday, August 26th, the Lynx have that top spot. The Dallas Wings have that 8th spot. But important to remember, while all of these teams will find themselves in the postseason, they haven't necessarily clinched seeding. They haven't clinched home court advantage in the first round of the postseason yet. So while we know who will be in the playoffs, we don't quite know where and when and who will be playing who.
Yeah, still a lot to play for in this final couple of games this week, and then we'll take the World Cup break, and we'll be seeing jockeying for seeding in that week after. I think the really interesting thing, looking at all the movement that could happen if you're looking at these standings right now, the largest gap is Minnesota at number 1, and then Golden State 4 games behind them. And we just saw Golden State put on a really great performance to keep the Lynx from clinching that number 1 seed. Golden State keeps their hopes alive, and they get their first win over Minnesota in their 10th try. I think they were 0-9 over the past 2 seasons of their existence. So there's so much room, for movement. We're talking 1 game and half games between most of these teams. A lot to play for.
I mean, you mentioned it. Golden State's 4 games back in the 2 seed of the Lynx at the 1 seed. That's the same difference between 2 and 8 is 4 games. That is how close we're talking. I mean, to your point, half a game, 1 game. I'm looking at the Dream, a half a game up of the Indiana Fever. Well, the difference between 4 and 5 is massive. The difference between, the 4 seed and the 5 seed is the difference between a home court advantage in the playoffs and going on the road in the first round of the playoffs. Ask anyone that home court advantage, being able to sleep in your own beds, being able to, have your home crowd rallying behind you in those first couple of games in the playoffs, that is massive. That is invaluable. And the difference is the tiniest margin.
And if you look down at, say, like the Liberty at 6, the Mystics at 7, the Wings at 8, Minnesota and Golden State are both very good, but if you want a good chance of getting out of the first round, do you really want the matchup with Minnesota? Probably not. You are hoping, there's New York Liberty 7.5 games back, Mystics tied with them, Dallas Wings are a half game back of them. You want that 6 because then you're going to face the number 3 seed, which could be Las Vegas, could be the Dream, but you'd kind of rather try and avoid them unless you like your matchup.
And I think an interesting thing to keep in mind here, all of these teams have already clinched, right? The hard part's over. You're in the postseason. Now you might see some coaches start to be a little bit more strategic looking at the seeding. A coach is never going to tell you, we're gonna on purpose lose so we can avoid getting this draw in the playoffs. No coach is actually going to think that way, or even if they do, they're not going to admit it. But I think that's going to be the interesting game within the game. The kind of chess match is the jockeying for seeding here. But it's going to be so fun to watch. All of these teams that have been so good and so dominant at times throughout the regular season find themselves represented in the postseason. It's not that long ago that we would see some teams that were below 500 find themselves in the WNBA postseason. Right now, you see the Dallas Wings, who are currently the 8th seed. They're 23-16, pretty comfortably above 500. So the level of competition in this league is just, along with the investment, along with the eyeballs, along with the popularity, the competition in this league is maybe even better than it's ever been before.
What a great call out. I also think one thing we'll be paying attention to that we're not going to get into now, but how does the break and who leaves impact these teams? We've said it here 3, 4, 5, 6 times. But if you look back at previous Olympic breaks, because there were many times the World Cup, the WNBA season would end early, kind of in September, and then the World Cup would happen. That can no longer happen with these long schedules. But if you look at the Olympic break years, there were some wild things that we saw happen out of them. You know, if you look back at 2021, it was the Sky and the Mercury, 5 and 6 seeds, who went all the way to the finals. So if you're looking at some of these teams, how does their play look like after the break during that one singular week and into the playoffs, depending on who went overseas, how many games did they play, what did the teams who had players stay home do to kind of build that other chemistry that Sophie Cunningham has talked about a lot. You look at a team like the New York Liberty. Can they finally meld together some really quality chemistry now that Leonie Fiebich is back, which she proved she is a massive key to this team. All of those things are at play over the next 4 or 5 games.
And you don't really know how it's going to affect or impact the team in a positive or a negative way. We talk about rest versus rust all the time. Sometimes the break is advantageous. You get your fresh legs underneath you, whatever, dings and bruises and pulls and tears you may have. You get some time to just sit and chill and rehab those injuries and come back closer to 100% after the break. Sometimes the break can derail momentum. Sometimes the break lets you sit back and rest. You lose that mental edge a little bit. So that's going to be critical, I think, over these next couple of weeks is making sure that it is a positive rest versus maybe a negative rest that we're going to see upcoming. Coming up on next week's episode, we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the FIBA World Cup, maybe some global trends that we're seeing, Team USA's contention, and how some of those things, like the World Cup break for players that will not be represented by Team USA, how that could affect the end of the season going into the postseason. So make sure to stay tuned for next week's episode on all things World Cup. So aside from these teams clinching, we also had some pretty bombshell news on Monday afternoon. Today is Wednesday. We got some news that the Phoenix Mercury were going to buy out DeWanna Bonner's contract, allowing her the ability to go play for another team, go chase another ring, because there's several different aspects to this. My first initial reaction to that was, this is DeWanna Bonner's last run. I don't think the Phoenix Mercury are going to, let her roam free. I don't think she would want to go somewhere else and chase a ring if this wasn't her last opportunity in her last window. Am I on base there?
I think you're on base. I think that's an absolutely fair assessment. Like, she's 39. She's kind of talked recently about considering retirement. She has twins. They're getting older. She's been in the league for a while. And for a lot of these older players or more veteran players, to get into this new CBA was a big deal, to make this money in their last year, to have the retirement benefits that are afforded in this CBA. That seemed like a big pushing point. I think there are 2 parties. There's the party that's going to be like, yeah, girl, like, get yours. Do what you have to do. We all have personal aspirations and goals and dreams. And, when you talk about leaving a legacy, the way a lot of people look at that is, what accomplishments have I made? And this would be hers, because in 10 to 20 years, this stuff isn't going to be talked about. What we're going to say is she was a 3-time champion and list out her other accolades. I think you have another group that feels icky. Like, they made no secret, she is ring chasing. She wants another ring. She wants to have this to her legacy. And you only do that this late in the year. I think an interesting aspect is, we hear so much like the we over the me. This feels very much like the me. To add this onto a team at this point in the season is interesting. How it has to be like a great fit, and it'll be interesting to see. I think sometimes we're going to get into teams here later, but sometimes you add a player and it messes with the chemistry, and it's not necessarily the player or the team's fault. It's just different. And does a team want to take that on August 26th with 5 games left to the playoffs. Maybe the world break helps with that.
Or maybe it doesn't, because you don't get that time to practice with each other. Or maybe it does, because they can just kind of do their own things and not only practice together, but go to the movies together, hang out together. So that's an interesting wrinkle in all of it. But, you know, you mentioned the ring chasing aspect of it. The Mercury GM, Nick Uren, even said that. Said, quote, "We worked out a buyout agreement that gives her the opportunity to chase a title in what could be her final postseason." Like, they're not trying to hide it at all. They're not trying to sugarcoat it at all and make this seem like it's anything other than what it actually is. DeWanna Bonner is probably looking in the twilight of her career and saying, I want to win one more championship. I don't blame her for that. I don't blame anyone for feeling like that's a little bit icky. I think that both things can be true at the same time. She said she wanted to go to a contender, obviously. DeWanna Bonner has now cleared waiver. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I have one more thing to kind of point out there. I think, like, when we talk about the ickiness of it, one of the things I thought about was you can't get away from the fact that Alyssa Thomas is also on the Mercury. This is the first time she's missed the playoffs in, I'm not looking at possibly her career, in a really long time. Like, Alyssa Thomas plays in the playoffs. They are engaged. They've been in a relationship for a long time. I wonder if it looks different if someone like AT, who is 7-time All-Defense, 4-time All-WNBA, she led in steals in 2020, rebounds in 2023, assists in 2025. She's a triple-double machine. She has all these accolades. I wonder if it looks different if someone like her does this to try and win a ring, knowing that maybe the chances are limiting, versus someone like DB who already has rings, has already summited to the top. Yeah, that was the only thing.
No, it's a fair point to bring up, because, I mean, DB has her own list of accomplishments: 2-time WNBA champion, 3-time WNBA All-Star, 2-time All-WNBA. DeWanna Bonner absolutely has a long list of accomplishments herself. But she does have 2 rings. And so there is a different kind of conversation. I think we can make a lot of parallels to maybe some other leagues of players that are fan favorites, players that people love. I look at like a Chris Paul, for example. If Chris Paul went out, who has never won a championship in the NBA, if he went out and just joined an absolute super team in order to win a championship, I think everyone's cheering him on and saying, good for you. Feels different when LeBron James is doing it. So important context. And I'm glad it's a point that you brought up, because that is context that matters. DeWanna Bonner has now cleared waivers. So after the Mercury announced that they bought out her contract, she was on waivers for 48 hours. She cleared waivers, as we all kind of expected, which essentially makes DeWanna Bonner a free agent. I would assume that whatever team signs her, whatever team picks her up, will sign her on a 10-plus year of service veteran minimum. That is $300,000, which will be prorated for the rest of the regular season. She's saying she wants to go chase a ring. If you want to look at championship contenders in a championship tier, the Lynx are absolutely in that conversation. The Valkyries, the Aces, the Fever, which kind of ironic. I feel like the Fever would be a pretty good fit, but I don't see DeWanna Bonner heading back to Indiana anytime soon. I don't know. She wouldn't necessarily be welcome back with, a pizza party. So I'm just going to go ahead and take the Fever off the list, even though it fits the criteria. Don't think that's going to happen. Dream, adding Atlanta to that list as well?
Those are the 5 for me. I think if you really are in this to ring chase, it doesn't sound like you necessarily want to join like the Mystics, for example. That's a very young team. Almost every single one of their players is a first or second year player. There's just too much at stake there, I think, that could go wrong with a young team. She doesn't want to be like Mama Bear. She wants a ring. That's what she wants.
And Benigni Hamilton is kind of serving that role of like, hey, I got you. What do you need? I'm a veteran. I've lived in this league. Like that's a role that fits her well. To your point, DB doesn't want to do that. She wants to win a championship.
She wants to win a championship. That's it. Get a 3rd ring. Minnesota, I think, is a possibility. I think Golden State is also one I would probably completely take off this board. Watch them sign her tomorrow. They didn't go after Kelsey Plum. They seem content with keeping this chemistry that they have. And I believe Natalie Nakase kind of spoke to that. This is a really interesting team to me in that kind of like I was saying earlier, this is a team built on the we versus the me, more so than any other team in this league. They are averaging, as of Wednesday morning, 35.9 points per game from bench players. The Connecticut Sun are at 28.6, but Golden State's 35.9 points per game is 13 more than the next closest postseason team. That would be the New York Liberty at 22.9. This is a very, everyone contributes. Everyone has a role. Watching them the other night against Minnesota, it felt like it almost didn't matter who was on the court. Like, they're going to put all of these players in. They're going to play their role. They're going to produce. They're going to play really, really tough defense. And they're going to hope to try and make the finals in their second year in existence, which is kind of wild. So I don't think that they would take this kind of chance this late in the season to disrupt any of that.
It totally makes sense. You talk about the team chemistry aspect of all of this. You don't play basketball on paper. DeWanna Bonner makes every team in the WNBA, every championship contender, a better basketball team. I don't think anybody is debating that, but at least on paper. But you don't play basketball on paper. When you have a good thing going, sometimes there's just there can be subtraction by addition. So I think that's a good call out by you. The Aces feel like they make so much sense. If you're betting on a team that can win a championship, what better than a team that's won 3 of the last 4 with the best player on the planet in A'ja Wilson, especially considering Melissa Smith went down with a knee injury in their matchup against Toronto over the weekend. We don't have a lot of clarity of exactly what that injury might look like, if Melissa Smith will miss some time, or if she is missing time, how much time she will miss. But that's at least, an area and a hole on that team. From what we know right now, of course, we don't have any clarity on Melissa Smith's injury, but the Aces just feel like it makes so much sense.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about the Aces, like the things that Becky Hammon can do as a head coach in terms of the basketball, but also in terms of motivating her team, maybe that's a spot where you say, okay, like, adding in a new player this late in the season doesn't matter as much as someone like Golden State, which is only in its second year together. This is a core that's been together for a long time. Maybe there are tricks to the trade in that. I am not a salary cap expert. They would have to figure out the money there to make that work.
Yeah, the Aces are in the hole. They're like over $100,000 over the cap. I do not claim to be, have never claimed to be a WNBA CBA expert. I do know in other leagues there are way easier ways to fudge the salary cap, converting some money into bonuses, and that takes it off of your books. Like, there are plenty of ways to fudge it. I don't believe the current WNBA CBA allows for that kind of fudging in the salary cap. So that's a good point to bring up, because I do see a minus in front of their cap space, and that is not great if you're looking to sign a player in the middle of the season. But to your point, too, this is a team that obviously knows how to win and knows what it takes to win championships. And I do think they all understand there is a certain bit of unselfishness that is required to win a championship. So when you have Jackie Young and Chelsea Gray and A'ja Wilson in this core of Aces players, they've been there before. Right? And so that just might be a different element of this player's going to help us win games. This player might give us a better chance at winning a championship. Just a certain mindset that might be different for a team that just did it and has been doing it for the last couple of years versus maybe a team that is still building to kind of get to that peak of the WNBA world. What about the Lynx?
Lynx, I think, have the best odds to win a championship. I think the other thing is, to consider, and I'm sure these conversations are being had, like, what does chasing a ring mean to you? Are you just in it for a ring? Like, Candace Parker goes to the Aces, and she does it for a lot of reasons, right? One of the kind of viral things she talks about was she finally got a locker. Like, she had just been in Chicago, where she went to, like, be with her hometown team. They win a championship there. That group splits up. She goes to the Aces. Now, this is not her fault at all, but she gets injured and she doesn't really play that season, but she still gets the ring. And so when you're talking about DB, is it just to win the ring? Is it just to try go out on top, which very, very, very few athletes do, whether it's professional or in the NCAA? You know, we saw that when we were watching the UConn Dynasty documentary. It's not common that you get to do that. Gino talked about that. So are you just going to kind of like be there if needed and win a ring? Or are you going to be, you know, the seventh best contributor because they have a solid team around them already? I think that would be the question if you join the Lynx.
And it kind of brings up the icky conversation of if you're content sitting on the bench and getting limited action and limited minutes in the playoffs, but you're getting a ring, maybe that feels a little bit more icky than, hey, I want to go somewhere and I want to plug and play right away. I'm going to do whatever it takes to help this team. Now, whatever a player wants to do, if DB's thought process, yeah, I just want to win a ring at all costs, that's her motivating factor, and that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion of however you might feel about that. It'll be fascinating to see, though, to watch this unfold, because she just cleared waivers. It's been a matter of like hours since then. So I think we'll start to see a lot of action here in the DeWanna Bonner sweepstakes. Any final thoughts on DB?
Just kind of pointing out that I think when this happens and both sides, the Phoenix Mercury, as you said, and DB said in that statement announcing it that this was mutual. You know, she wants to get a ring. That was not specifically used, but she wants to get a ring. Usually when that kind of stuff happens, there's been chats and maybe she knows what teams she's targeting that have a mutual interest and might be trying to figure it out. I don't think sweepstakes is a fun word. Maybe it's a sweepstakes, but maybe not a free for all.
Yeah. Also, on the Phoenix side of things, I have applauded the Phoenix Mercury as an organization as a whole. It just feels like they do a lot of things right. I do feel like this is the Phoenix Mercury's way of saying we are a pro player organization. If you come here, we will listen to you. We will work with you. We want to make sure that your needs as a player and as an individual are heard and are served. So, in a WNBA world where a lot of players are signing short-term contracts, I think that's the Mercury's way of saying, hey, we're over here and we will be player forward. We will be very pro player. So, however you feel about, the situation, I do think that this looks good on the Phoenix Mercury for not essentially holding DeWanna Bonner hostage when she wants to go out and go win a championship somewhere else.
I also don't think we can overlook that this was a year where, we can't say it enough, the CBA was not done until March. That condensed everything. That's the reason that you had a lot of players signing short-term deals, or maybe they just decided, hey, I'm going to stay with the team I'm at because I know them and I don't feel like I can make a great decision right now in this 1 week free agency window. I don't know how much that played a part into this, but it could have, because we know that time was short and that a lot of players, felt like they were rushed, and usually they have more time to make a decision and take everything into account. So maybe this is something that has been discussed previously.
Yeah, that is a great point. We will see. We'll keep everybody updated as news comes along of where DeWanna Bonner will play out the rest of her season and maybe potentially the rest of her career. But coming up next, we will be joined by Courtney Cox. She is a sports scholar. She is a professor at the University of Oregon and the author of Double Crossover: Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball. We have a great conversation with Courtney coming up about some of the issues that are facing the WNBA, because there's obviously no shortage of them. So coming up next, Courtney Cox will join the show. We have a very special guest today on Hoops 360. We are so honored and excited to welcome Courtney Cox. She's a sports scholar and author of Double Crossover, Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball. And she is currently an associate professor in the Department of Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies at the University of Oregon. She truly does it all. Courtney Cox, we are so glad to have you on the show. Excited to get your perspective, especially with all of the conversation that's been surrounding the WNBA this season. So much we want to get into with you, so I want to start here. This year, we thought was going to be a celebration of the WNBA, the 30th year of the league, a new CBA, and there's a lot of reasons to say that there has been a lot of celebration this year, but there's also plenty of reasons to say that maybe that celebration has been overshadowed by talks of race, by talks of sexuality, by talks of transgender athletes and their involvement in women's sports. How have you seen this year unfold, and how would you maybe categorize this year in the WNBA? Is it a success? Are these just natural growing pains that the league is dealing with? Or would you consider this year maybe a dark cloud, maybe a dark storm cloud that's been hanging over the WNBA?
Yeah, I think it's a big question. I think
it's a big question.
I've told so many friends, so many group chats that I am so grateful that my book, Double Crossover, came out last year. I really charted 2015 to 2025 kind of as my main area. And even at that time, I was scrambling, like in the conclusion, to be like, and another thing, and we should think about this. And so if I was finishing that book right now, I would be in shambles. So selfishly, I'm kind of like, okay, I have this timestamp of 10 years of what's going on across women's hoops, internationally, domestically, college, Athletes Unlimited. And then this all happens. Everyone's like, this is a great time for the book to come out. And so one of the things that I really struggle with is thinking about how to think about my work as a way to set us up to have a conversation. Is this a movement? Is this a moment? What are these growing pains, especially for folks that have been fans of women's hoops, especially fans of the W for a long time? What does it mean when there's all these kind of new interlopers coming in? And so I think one of the questions that newer folks that are fans that are like, is it always like this? Like, with more visibility comes that, I wouldn't even say scrutiny, because I think there's great fans that are starting to say, why doesn't League Pass work? Why are there all the games scheduled on one day and then no games the next day? So there's scrutiny that I think is warranted when we ask these questions, or folks that were newer and finding out about league minimums a couple of years ago. That scrutiny is necessary to help move things forward, because there are a lot of ways that the league can move and push back against the Players Association without those eyes. So I think it's really important. We see that with the pay us what you owe us, right? Of how fans were also mobilized. On the flip side, as you mentioned, there's also what happens with not only new fans coming in and pushing prices up, new fans coming in, not understanding the culture, not doing their own research, not doing the work to really learn about these players, who they are as people, who they are as athletes. And so with that, we have these very surface level assumptions, surface level fandom, and then on the flip side, mobilizing, weaponizing athletes to their own political ends. So I don't think that this is unique to the W. I think the demographics of the W lend itself to that kind of very historical, very understandable in terms of the legacy of a lot of the ways that, as you mentioned, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia are moving through this space. So it's not surprising. It's really disappointing, honestly, because as you mentioned, there's so much that we could be talking about with this league. There's so much that's exciting. And yet I'm still seeing everyone run for either the rage bait of it all or the thing that's going to get the clicks, rather than, I mean, how many folks, I know y'all have, but how many folks have really talked and broken down what NECA's retirement means, right? How many folks are really thinking about this rookie class that's been really interesting and really dynamic in a way that most rookies are just going to have a welcome to the W moment, right? And it's really exciting to see someone like Olivia come in like, wow, we got some movement, some momentum. And yet the narratives that seem to overshadow, I think, is fair. And so I don't want to be doom and gloom about it. I think my general feeling is so many of these things are cyclical. I start my book talking about 2020 in the Wubble, and that feels like forever ago in terms of what we were talking about and thinking about in that moment. And so I think about these as cycles, but I also acknowledge that this is a really stinky one that we find ourselves in, even in the midst of so many things that I love talking about and I think are so exciting in the league.
You mentioned the interlopers pretty early and people not understanding the culture, which we've talked a lot about here. The WNBA, I think more so than any other league, is steeped in a certain type of culture that's just a little bit different than most of the major men's leagues. And then you also mentioned like the Nneka and the Olivia of it, which is interesting because to talk about both of those players, I think it is important to talk about the history, which is where this question is going, I swear. Instead of asking like how important is the history to talking about this league, because we know it's really important, I think one of the interesting things people have talked about the last couple of days is there is this lack of media over the past 30 years of the league, or say the first 25. There's not a ton of beat writers. There's not a lot of conversations like you're talking about people wanting to have on a massive scale. How has that impacted this conversation and maybe even impacted your book as you started to look at things over the past 5 years?
Yeah, I think for me, when I started going to WNBA games when I moved to Los Angeles. It was the first time I had lived in a city that had a W team, and I became obsessed with the Sparks. I ended up working for the Sparks. I couldn't stop thinking about like what's happening in this space when I'm in the concourse of what was then the Staples Center. I still call it that. But thinking about what this space meant, right? Like I came for the sports, but I got something else and it left me with questions. And then when I worked for the Sparks, I was working on a season-long campaign, and this is to date it. This is the 2015 season. And we were working on all season to sell out one regular season game. The entire campaign was about one game against the San Antonio Stars. I'm really dating myself here. But thinking about the effort to get people in Los Angeles to know that there's a women's basketball team that they should be supporting. And this is right after we had the Guggenheim group, Magic Johnson's group, by the team. So there's a lot of tumultuous things happening. So that's kind of where my research starts from. But as you mentioned, when I started thinking about this as a researcher, as someone that used to be a journalist and now works in a scholarly space, it was so hard. I was like, it was 20 years. I was like, I'm going to build a 20-year archive of the W, and then I'm going to like pull from that. And I realized I would have to go to fans' homes, players' mamas' homes, because that stuff didn't exist in an actual physical archive. I was pulling from Library of Congress. I was pulling from schools, whatever I could find. But there really was this lost way, this very singular narrative that didn't seem to tell the whole story of how this league began. I interviewed folks that helped write the first business plan for the W. I was really thinking strategically about how can I tell this story from a different angle. And for me, it ended up being the players that helped get me there. Primarily, I was working for the Sparks, and on media day, which is the day they assign you to do all the Jumbotron fun stuff, and then you walk the players through these stations. I was assigned to Sierra Burdick. And at the time, she was one of Pat Summitt's last recruiting classes at Tennessee. She had been drafted in 2015 by the Sparks. And she was already talking about playing in Italy in what we would consider a basketball season in the fall through the spring. She was going to be playing there and then playing in a summer season in the W. And I was thinking, you're 22, you just graduated from college, and you're already thinking globally about your work. And so for me, when you add the global part in, it's even harder to find those stories or people that are willing to tell them, because there's a lot of stuff that happens. And so for me, I'm a really small piece of a lot of other people trying to recover these histories. And I'm not a historian by trade. I'm a journalist. My PhD is in communication. But I think for me, it was really about using interviews, sitting in gyms, sitting in locker rooms with athletes, and really trying to recover part of it. So I'm this like 2015 to 2025 chunk. But when we think about the legacy, there's folks that are writing about early like 70s Olympics women's basketball. There are people that are writing about early college. And so I think we're lucky there's so many people that are taking that time, but there's also a lot of journalists and scholars and fans that are also not compensated and not compensated well for trying to do this. It's not something that's really widespread supported. And we see right now in this moment, there's not a lot of media literacy about the W or how to tell these stories about these larger issues. And so I find that to be really troubling as someone that still believes in journalism, still believes in telling stories. And I think that's what's frustrating in press conferences that I listen to, in reports that I read, in the ways that we're telling stories about the good, bad, ugly. That's what's really frustrating to me, is that the lack of skill, dedication, and craft, honestly, really does a disservice, because that creates the next archive of how we remember what happened this season.
Cass mentioned how it's, for so many reasons, it's important to preserve the history of this league, of this sport, of women's sports in general. One of those reasons, of course, is just to appreciate how far we've come if we look back on where we started. Another reason is so we don't make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. Learn from history so we don't repeat history. From all of your research and the historian that you have become about this league, what is one lesson that you have learned that we don't need to be repeating in today's WNBA?
Ooh, I love this. I think one of the things that I continue to go back to is centering athletes, where athletes fall in a story or don't, where athlete voice comes through. I think that's one of the biggest lessons. And I think it's a bigger lesson for where I find myself in academia. We're so quick to just say, we're going to do a content analysis of 500 articles. And we found out everyone was being racist and sexist. We're like, okay, what do we do with that? But how does it affect folks on the ground, right? And so it's one thing for us to talk through all the discourses, right? But I'm really invested myself in how are athletes experiencing this moment? Where are they excited or disappointed? And so it is harder. I don't want to underestimate that for journalists or scholars, of getting folks. They're busy. You may have to hit up some comms folks, some PR folks a couple of times. But I think when we make assumptions for athletes, no matter of how they must be feeling or how things must be, I think it's lazy. Sometimes it's about avoiding the vulnerability of finding out what you don't know. But I think there's so much that's absent in the archives or the ways that we're talking about athletes in the past, or we're talking for them. And I never want to make that assumption. I've been so surprised by how athletes have experienced sport in ways that I was either very cynical about something. I'll use Athletes Unlimited as an example of, like, they say they're doing all this stuff, but are they, right? And so listening to athletes' experiences. I focus on labor in my work. So a lot of times when I'm thinking about a league, one of the things I think is that there's a difference between a league and its athletes. There's a difference between the WNBA and the WNBPA. And so one of the things that I am always thinking about is there's something that's happening in New York with Kathy and them, and there's something that's happening with the players. And so I think not trying to conflate it when we say the WNBA. It's like, well, there's a league that's corporate and there's a set of players that are unionized. And so I think we would do very well, actually, to think about those as factions, as different groups that are interrelated in many ways, but may have very separate takes, investments, and ideas about how we move this league forward.
I hear you on the not making assumptions for athletes and listening to their experience, right? I'm curious, though, where you feel like that actually comes from and who you're talking about when you say we, because there does seem to be this, you mentioned media literacy, which is in the gutter in this country for far more than the WNBA.
Literacy in general.
Period.
We don't have readers.
Yes. That was a good profile. But there is a conflation, I think, also by athletes themselves of media who is there trying to do this work. You mentioned kind of sometimes being stopped by communications people, or athletes aren't speaking or refuse to speak about certain things, or PR people, what have you. And then social media uproar that seems to make things as stories by doing exactly what you said, making assumptions for athletes when we don't have anything to go by. So I'm just wondering if you can explain that a little more, like the action piece that you want to see so that that's gone.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is the relationship building is so key, and it takes so much time, honestly. I am someone that uses ethnographic methods, which means I interview people. I do participant observation. I sit in a space for a while. I watch people. And sometimes I'm in gyms or I'm in spaces for like a while. And like nothing's happened. I feel like I'm wasting my time. Like, I don't know how I'm going to write this up and prove I'm actually doing something. And it's that 20th day. It's that one random passing thing that is like, oh, aha, that's the moment, right? And so for me, even when we're having conversations about locker room access, I'll use that as a low-hanging fruit, as a discourse that I think is important, but is also a bit silly, right? Because what insights do you actually get inside of a locker room? If you're a journalist, there are ways, but across sport, regardless of gender, regardless of what sport we're talking about, it's a practice that we do, but we don't have to do, right? And so anytime my thing is like, what's the value add of going into a space that I think is very sacred for athletes? Times that I've been inside of locker rooms, I've been very careful. People are going to be naked in there. People are going to be vulnerable. They're going to be sharing things. They're going to have injuries that they're nursing that they haven't told anyone about. And so part of it is having the relationship to be invited into a locker room. And I know that the conversations about what people feel they should have access to, especially because social media has created very strong parasocial relationships where people feel like they know athletes, or journalists feel like they've been at these things, they've been at press conferences, they've gotten access, and they should be able to have access however. But I do think there is a difference between slowly building a relationship with an athlete or any media member, that wants to have access to a front office member, anyone over time. It's like, if I'm just hitting you up because I just need to get this quick soundbite, it's so transactional. What are we going to really get from that? And so I found for me that these very well-trained, very intellectual, media-ready athletes, so often I sit down to interview someone and they're ready to give me the soundbite. They're like, this is what I would want to see in print. This is the thing I want clipped. And there's so many times where I have to be like, hey, this isn't a gotcha interview. I'm not looking for something quick. We can just sit and talk. You can tell me the whole story. You don't have to be like, oh, it's too long. The short version of this is. And I realize how people's bodies, like their shoulders, their bodies sort of like, oh, you just want to have the conversation. You just want to actually hear what that felt like for me. And so I think there's something about that, even when athletes get traded or cut, like we talk about it as a headline, but that's someone's life. They have to move. When someone doesn't make camp, all of these things are things that when I experience them, it hits different when someone's like, don't even worry about booking that flight now. I'm about to get cut, right? What do you text back to that? What's the voice note in response? And so I think we've lost some of the relational aspect. I really believe in integrity when it comes to journalism, but there is no such thing as objectivity. There's like your objectivity, but your set of ethics, how you're going to treat people, and being invested, pulling up to the practices. Or so often I hear from other journalists that are like, there were this many people in the room and no one was asking questions, or they had open practice, but only 2 people were there. Are you the person that shows up? You're more likely to be the person that gets the interview or gets, the scoop on something. And so I think we've lost the craft. When I say craft, I really think about the fact that there's so many barriers to access. There's so many ways the W has a lot of work to do in terms of its comm and PR and its outreach to media. But on the flip side, I think media, there are barriers that can be easily addressed by building relationship and being good people and doing good work. And so I think looking for the clicks and looking for the headline is a choice. And I think writing really great features. I love a Mirren Fader feature when it drops, because I know that Mirren took the time to write something, to sit with something, to really be in community with someone, their family. And part of the reason her work works and part of the reason that people love working with her is that her legacy is, I'm going to sit in and get the real story, the full story. And I'm going to think about a way to make it something that people can return to and understand more than just an athlete, a moment, a game, but this larger kind of scope of where we are. And I think that's what people want, honestly. The folks that are literate, I think they want that.
I agree with you. I love her features. I love writing a feature. I love reading a feature. And sometimes they do well. I do want to point out, though, about the locker room, there is a massive value add there. I think, that is where that relationship building can and used to, and in other leagues, kind of begins, right? It's an opportunity to be like, hey, JJ, I saw on Instagram you were trying to learn how to use an espresso machine. Like, I'm doing the same thing. What are your tips? And that doesn't have to make a story. Maybe it does one day, but that's the relationship built there, but also kind of like, I think you had mentioned when you go to a coffee house or an airport, you're observing people, like that's an observational opportunity to see, after a loss, after a win. I hear you on that's their space, but there are certainly other opportunities to have them in a room. And so while I hear what you're saying, I do want to make the point here that I think in the W specifically, the lack of locker room access, the lack of that relationship building that is not just transactional, because I think a lot of it, unfortunately, has become transactional where they're sitting on a podium and we're sitting below. I don't think that has helped their case in the past 5 years.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think the transactional piece is very vivid. I think the value add for journalists, absolutely, no question. But the value add for athletes and how they feel about folks in this space is kind of the reference point of like, is that connection possible at the end of a practice? Is that connection possible in the hallway? Like, I see ways that it could absolutely be that, but I think there's such a range in how some athletes are like, cool, I don't mind. Some athletes are like, this is the thing that stresses me out, right? So what's the cost benefit analysis of someone being deeply uncomfortable or someone that doesn't know the culture and how to move in this space? Because I also read that as you being someone that knows how to move in a space versus people being very weird in the space. And so what are the ways that the league has a responsibility to have a set of policies for athletes on how they're going to conduct themselves? Because I think the comparison to other sports of like other sports do it, and it's like, well, those athletes kind of hate it too. But the thing of like, who do we trust and where is it good? Like, I'm going to gravitate towards you in a locker room because I've seen how you move with other people versus someone that's coming in, just got credentialed, doesn't really have the background or understanding of how to move in this space, but has now gotten access. And so I hear that. How do we make it better? How do we make it better for everyone? Is it this certain window of time? Is this a way that we can also help athletes and anyone that's going to be in that space move well? Because it's also not just media members that are stepping into that space. There are ways that even when other employees are in that space. So I don't even want to single out my brethren and sister and my siblings in journalism, but I do. That's a question I find to be so sticky because some people love it and some people they're like, oh my God. And I get it. I think for me, I would be someone that would be so particular. I'm very introverted. I would be in the corner with all my stuff. Like, please don't look at me. But for some folks, that is where you can be a full person, or you're kind of doing that transition from being the athlete to the person. You're putting on the street clothes. And so that might be a really rich opportunity. But I think we can't, in the ways that I want to think about, how do we manage decorum? How do we have policies? And so I'm so curious about that. How do we make it better? How do we make it a better experience for everyone? I think is the big question.
I think, finding that perfect happy medium between we need these kind of one-on-one intimate conversations, just human to human conversations that aren't always available at a media availability or at a press conference, while also making sure that everybody feels like boundaries are up and everybody's respected. Kind of along those same lines, I also cover several other leagues. I cover the NBA, I cover the NFL, I cover college football, and I'm seeing in the WNBA so many players, rightfully so, celebrate and enjoy all of the fruits of their labor, so to speak, the money, the attention, all of those things are great. But there are things that I see maybe happening in the WNBA that just simply would not fly in maybe some of these other larger, more lucrative men's leagues. For example, it would never fly in the NFL for the star player to just not be available for a press conference afterwards. I think about AZ's draft night and how she was asked a question about her relationship with Paige Beckers. Whether you agree with the question or not, I could never see a PR person interfering with an NBA player that was asked maybe about his relationship. The way that social media has been such a topic of conversation in the W, how there have been players calling out, asking for Kathy to kind of find these guidelines for the truly disgusting and horrific comments that they've gotten on social media. Unfortunately, though, those are not unique to just WNBA players. So all of that to say, how do we hold that same level of respect and build those relationships, but while still giving the WNBA the same treatment that maybe some of the male counterpart leagues get, if they want to be in those same spaces, if they want to get the same level of respect as maybe the NBA or the NFL or the NHL or other larger leagues?
I mean, I don't see men's professional leagues as the standard. So maybe that's my framework, is that just because it happens on the men's side doesn't mean that has to be the way we do things. I think there's ways that, again, a general ethics, a general practice of what we're doing and what this is for, and where it's for. So thinking about even for the draft night, I think there's weird things we do on the men's side for draft night too. It's like you're having the best moment of your life and they're like, tell us about when your father died when you were 5. What does that mean
weird
for you right now?
That's weird.
Why do we do that? It's like, we're going to cut to Holly Rowe and if the emotional music starts playing, I'm like, oh no, his older brother was supposed to get drafted and he died. And now we're having this. It's like, why do we have certain traditions that have now become tropes? And so for me, the idea of we have to treat women like men in order for them to get respect, in a media sense or otherwise, it's kind of like, what should our media ethics be across sports? And so for me, I'm kind of like, the question is fair, if we use the AZ example, but to what ends? You're not doing it. Like, what kind of feature can you write if you're not actually spending time? If we're not going to do a day with AZ and we're just going through and it's like part of the conversation of this larger story, you're going to file your draft day story and like, what are you trying to pull from that? Like, my brain, I'm like, how will that story get written up? What is the way you're writing it? And so even this discourse that had started around nepotism, who gets drafted where and how, not based on someone's incredible level of talent and what they bring to the table, I think even some of those discourses kind of emerge in a way that it isn't like that, because we don't quite have that moment yet, at least openly, where we have a professional male player that's being drafted to a team where his partner also plays, right? And so I think it is unique. And I think when people come into the space, they have to learn about how that moves. There are so many people that play in college basketball and in the W that are dating each other, that did date each other, that broke up. It's just, that is the culture of this league. That's one of the things that makes it fun and messy. That's one of the things that makes it dynamic. And so I think it's like trying to do this one size fits all, I think is really hard. But if you've been covering one league for a while, you have a set of standards and practices. It's very understandable that you would just like move those over to this space. Like, I'll just cover it. Because in your mind, you're like, that's equality, right? Like, I do it this way here. I'm going to do it this way here. That makes sense. But what I think we could think about is, how could we learn something from these experiences that we could also take over to the men's side? How could it also work that way? And so I know that I'm speaking of these things very theoretically, very glossy. We have endless amounts of time. There's no word limit. Deadlines don't exist. I'm talking this dreamy fantasy world. But I think it's something for us to think about of like, what's the culture of sport? How do we treat athletes? What do we expect in terms of access? What is this social media space we're in? How do we have to maneuver? When I talk to journalists that are mad at content creators, like they get all the space, they get to sit up front, I've been doing this for years, this person has 1 million followers. Like, we can't just not understand that that's going to be a thing. Like, how do we address these things where everyone leaves whole, right? And we're able to tell these stories and build up and really help in the service of the athletes that we're trying to really talk about. And so I hear all of those. When I hear the content creator side versus the journalist side, when I hear people like, I've covered the NFL and NBA, and this is what I always do. But those are all such real things. But my thing is like, I want to think about, how do we create something that's better for all of these leagues, better for all of these journalists, better for all of these athletes? And so that's the hard work. That's the thing that I don't want to act as if there's a one pager we can send around. But it really is, that's the real thing. People have an expectation. And then we have these moments. And then what are the things that on the team side, they also have to realize these are grown, very trained, very smart athletes that also can stand up for themselves, right? And so in what ways is it kind of paternalistic as well? So that's the other side of it, is when you mention like, we wouldn't see that in other spaces. It's like, why are we actually seeing that step in? Because what I see when I heard Paige speak on it is someone that actually can speak on it. And I believe the same for AZ. And this idea that you have to protect, if someone asks for that, of like, I don't want questions about that. Male athletes do that all the time. I don't want questions about blah, blah, blah. Like, we're not talking about my DUI or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And so they do also say like, none of that, I won't be addressing that. Trade rumors, whatever. They're like, I'm not talking about that. But at the same time, you said and so part of it is like they can say it, they can speak for themselves. And so I think there's something about that of like, if you don't want to answer the question, I believe in you to say, I don't want to answer that. Athletes tell me all the time, like, I can't really go into that, or I can't talk about that yet. Completely understandable. But the step in, as you mentioned, is actually the thing I had the biggest issue with.
You kind of went into it talking about it there, but we do hear all the time, like the WNBA does not have to be the NBA, which is totally true. Each of these leagues can learn a little bit from each other. Outside of that whole, you can talk about it yourself. You don't need someone to step in. Are there other things you see either way that you want change to fit in line?
Well, I will say there have been some incredible journalists who have done important investigative work, who have lost access to W games because they've been critical of the league. And so in the same kind of protective, paternalistic way, I think we can be critical of a league, especially, this is me and my world and my brain, of labor issues, salary cap scenarios, ways that we're treating people when they get pregnant. These are just a couple examples that come to mind of how we tell stories. We need to FOIA stuff. We need to go in and sometimes expose when bad things are happening in the sport. This idea of just being a cheerleader for a sport because you want it to succeed, because you want it to grow, does not help it grow. We have to hold people to account. We have to hold Kathy to account. And so part of it is that the kid gloves piece of it is really frustrating when it comes to when there are issues happening, or, what are we going to be able to do if we don't have that awareness, or if someone's not helping tell the stories? And I've seen multiple folks that have found things, have been told things by athletes. And then when they looked into it, when they asked certain questions in press conferences, when they went to figure stuff out behind the scenes, they lost access. And so I think that's one of the big issues, is that people are afraid of losing access. They know there's an issue going on or something brewing, and they're afraid to actually fully report on it, or it's kind of hushed away. And so I think that's one of the big issues, is that we don't have great investigative journalism because people in the past that have tried to do so have been pushed back, right? And so now, again, with this kind of idea of like, well, this person's going to push out content that's positive for the league, we'll let that person sit front row. That person will always get to ask a fun, silly question about someone's hair. And so those folks are important, and they do important work as well, but that's a promotional thing versus a journalistic way that we understand and uncover what's happening in a space. And so we see that come to a head, especially during negotiations in any league, right? The league's going to say, we're doing this. A players association is going to say, we're doing this. Like, who's going to do the actual work to help us understand these two perspectives, to put things into account, to actually look at money? I still believe in that. And the W hides a lot of its financial information, and we really need to pull them into account. And it comes into a head with the CBA thing. When the NBA does this too. They'll be like, we're broke. Whenever they need to, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, David Barry is the king of this, but I think the idea of really taking to task these important aspects, to treat this league seriously, including being critical of it, and then to make sure that those journalists are protected. Because losing access, this isn't just one player won't talk to you. That happens all the time. But the idea of revoking someone's access in that way for asking important questions, that's something that really still blows my mind. That continues to happen.
It's unfortunate.
Would you like to name names?
Oh, I won't be. I mean, some of them have tweeted about it. It's on the internet, but I think I'll say like 2016 to 2018, 19, there were definitely a few journalists that had looked into, different things happening with teams, in particular teams' treatment of athletes. And I think their like sudden kind of loss of access was a little disheartening, right? But I understand this is a business that is really trying to protect its brand. I understand that there are ways that teams are trying to protect players sometimes if something's going to come out and they don't want to see something out in the media. And so my thing is, again, what's the protecting the brand versus actually protecting an athlete versus letting journalists do their jobs? And so I just want to encourage folks that are, especially newer journalists, or even like, I love how many women journalists, how many folks I even have on campus at Oregon that just want to cover women's sports. I think that's one of my positives, right? My little rainbow happiness is like, there are more and more folks that don't want to use it as a stepping stone, that see it as a platform. They see podcasts like this. They see all types of creators and journalists that are able to make a world where they just cover women's sports. And so there's something really dope about that. Me coming out, I graduated out of J school in 2008. That was not a reality. It's a reality if you want to do a side project, right? But I think there's something exciting about that. But I still want the chops to be there and not to feel so caught up in, I want this to succeed. I want this to be a great thing, that you aren't able to have a critical lens and ask really important questions too. So I find the balance to be like the larger issue at hand is like, do people feel empowered to do so, or do they feel like they're going to lose access, which might mean they lose their job, if they're a beat reporter especially. So I worry about that. But I think that, that's not particularly unique to the W, but it is exacerbated in a newer league that has fewer folks that are constantly covering, constantly getting press access.
You mentioned Kathy earlier, Kathy Engelbert, WNBA commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
We have been critical of her on this show, and I think it's fair to be critical of a commissioner. I don't think there's a single commissioner in sports that's 100% popular. They all get booed.
Yeah.
But also, Kathy Engelbert was the commissioner that oversaw the most lucrative CBA in the history of the WNBA. That we're seeing the valuations for some of these teams absolutely skyrocket, and she works for the owners, and the owners' prerogative is making money. So I think there's a lot of good that you can say about Kathy. There's a lot of criticism that we can give to Kathy Engelbert. What does she need to do better at to better serve the WNBA and to better serve its players?
We've had a trend, and I will say, Kathy is important for a lot of reasons. I think that before we had presidents of the WNBA, the commissioner was the commissioner of the NBA and WNBA. So Kathy's important for a lot of different reasons, historically, just thinking about this move. What that move looks like in practice is still a little bit vague to me in terms of where that shift in power happened in the day-to-day, right? How is it different than Adam Silver being considered the commissioner of both leagues? So based on how he speaks about it whenever asked. And so I will say, if I can take it back to kind of the historical lens, David Stern, who absolutely believed in the WNBA, is a huge reason that it exists today, was a project he was really set on happening, right? Adam Silver inherited a W that I think in many ways is not a priority for him at all. And so for Kathy, she has a really difficult job. This is my Kathy apologist moment of like, there's a really interesting way that you have to navigate a league that is so fractured in terms of ownership, whether teams are independently owned or they're owned with an NBA team. I don't envy that job at all, because the ways that there's different, and especially in this moment of expansion, there's a lot that is being juggled, right? And so the top line item is, yes, more teams, excellent. Great CBAs. We can talk about who's responsible for why those CBAs happen. But I think that with all of this growth, all this visibility, what do you do with it, right? This is also the NBA kind of equivalent of this is that first $1 billion broadcast deal, right? Crazy money, crazy eyes on a league. How do you continue to build, especially as the superstars that have made that broadcast deal big are kind of heading out? Who are the next superstars of the NBA? The NBA has a couple of different crises happening over there. That's not what this show's about. But at the same time, when we are critical of commissioners, I think it's really healthy. I think one of the big things Kathy has to decide is a policy thing. These aren't like, I'm going to handle a crisis or I'm going to handle a headline. How are we going to move as a league when this happens? It can be about when an athlete protests. This was a huge issue before with the previous president who decided to really punish players for doing the same thing that their NBA peers were doing, right? So again, under the same commissioner, but having a different president. So I think Kathy has to decide what happens when athletes are threatened, what happens when athletes are harmed, what are we going to do as a league? How will we hold people accountable? I'll talk, the other side of this is we've also had very lenient kind of penalties when things like domestic violence happen? How are we going to have a really strong policy and understanding of that? What happens when there's a discrimination, when someone's pregnant and they are cut from a team? So I think policy, having a strong semblance of policy that's not based on the whims of how people react on the internet, but saying this is what we do as a league. And this is how we move forward. And I find it to be very reactionary versus proactive in terms of what this next era of the league. And there's so many things going on that it's so difficult. I find it really bizarre that an expansion draft, I don't know if y'all watched the expansion drafts, but it was the most bizarre thing where it was kind of like, we kind of pretended, we cosplayed a draft, and then they were like, and then here's everyone else. And I was like, what a missed opportunity for two new cities, Portland and Toronto this year, to not have the full energy to really hype up. This is such a hype up potential moment. Tell the stories of these athletes being drafted into an expansion league. So the media piece is my last piece, is that there's so much potential and possibility still on the table. And in a really disjointed streaming era of live sport viewership, it's going to be hard. We got to make League Pass work all the time. We got to make sure people know how to find games. It shouldn't be like, is this the one that's, and then do we do? So it really has to be, and all leagues are struggling with this right now. If you watch sports, half of it is figuring out, do you have the app? Do you need someone's password? Is this a free one? Is this not? Is this online? Do I need to, airplay this? And so this is a larger kind of expansion of the media empire that we live under. But I do find that to be the media piece of people are thirsty for it now. Are you going to be able to put on the full broadcast? That expansion draft is one of the things I have still been mad about because I saw so much potential. Tell the story of each one of these players. We got time. We don't have to do a 30-minute, spin through really quick. And here are the players. Go for it. Sell me a dream. Give me all the good stuff. And so I think if the league could have the same energy towards media and storytelling that they do towards mascots, I think we're there, I think that's it.
You've mentioned a few times, and I love it, telling the stories of these players and highlighting who they are, what their background is, how they got here, who they are as human beings. And I agree that I think that that's maybe a blank spot in sports media in general, not just in the WNBA.
Sure.
But I also acknowledge that what we do, ESPN, national media as a whole, it's a for-profit business. And we have noticed we put Caitlin Clark's name and face on something and it attracts people like wildfire. And also because she's a wonderful story and she's worth talking about. Where's that balance there of, look, we know as a for-profit media business that is in the business of eyeballs and clicks and popularity, we know what works versus serving fan bases and telling those stories and going deep, even though everybody is overworked and underpaid and has a lot on their plate. Where do we find that delicate balance between digging deeper, but also understanding that, we got bills to pay as well?
Yeah. I think the for-profit piece is great. I'm really glad that you framed it that way because I think there's something we really lose when people keep acting like not just the women's sports as a charity thing. Like, you're lucky we're covering, you're lucky we have a segment. And I think that is the raggedy mentality I wish we'd get past because I think so much of the history of women's sports and women doing really anything is about people directly impeding that progress and people just doing it anyway. And so part of it is frustrating because when I hear on the college sports side, for example, what we call revenue generating sports. And I have often seen in my travels and my free time that a lot of money is just left on the table. When we talk about why certain pay equity in tennis, for example, wasn't happening, they're like, well, the men play more sets. And it's like, well, you set the terms of the sets. And so part of it is like, when you tell me it's not revenue generating, but you charge $50 for parking at a football game and then parking's free at a women's basketball game, you've chosen not to take in revenue, right? And so part of it is the for-profitness of it all, right? Like we live under capitalism. Like, we have to talk about that. And media companies in particular are always thinking about how to count the numbers. We've seen so many layoffs across various entities. It's heartbreaking when you see really good folks in media that are losing their jobs. So part of it is, if the metrics say push Caitlin Clark, people push Caitlin Clark, right? And there's a lot of different reasons why that is, that I think most of your listeners will be very aware of. But I think the other side of it is, but there's a scarcity mindset there. There are more stories to be told, right? It's like, if this works, we're never thinking we could plug and play with this player. Like, I think that's a different kind of reframe of like, why did this work? Was it Caitlin? That could be one metric. But was it the way we told the story and made it expansive? What did we teach someone about in terms of her game? I think a lot of us are thirsty, especially I hear from newer fans that have jumped on more recently. They want to also know more about how basketball works. I think there's a market for that. We've seen that in a couple of podcasts, a couple of general kind of basketball podcasts, that some people are just like thirsty to be like, that was really cool. Tell me why it worked. Why did that play work? And some of us are basketball nerds in general. Some people may not have been fans of the W, but they started watching, or they really love the women's game in terms of the style of play, and they want to know more. And so I think there's a lot of different stories. And as you mentioned, time is finite. People have deadlines. People have things to do. They kind of want to have a life outside of this. And so part of it is like, how do we divide and conquer? How do we think about different platforms and ways to tell different stories? Some people just want to hear the mess. Some people want the TMZ shade room of it all. I think they should have that. Some people really want to know X's and O's. Some people want to know, who are the college players I should be looking at that will be going into the draft next year? I think there's a lot of different ways to service fans. I think when we go to the least common denominator, or we decide to kind of mirror what works, we kind of lose the opportunity to be really expansive, because everyone wants something different. And I honestly think there's plenty of room for a lot of folks to have that conversation. When former players are geeking out over a play they saw last night, I will watch that. Even if you're sitting in your car just being like, I saw this and I had to talk about it, right? If someone's talking about the evolution of their game, I think that can be exciting. And if someone's talking about the fit they wore in the tunnel, I think that's cool too. I think there's the ways that we have to either take it so seriously, or it has to just be really fluffy. I think there's enough dynamic players and enough stories that we still haven't told yet. So I think about it not in terms of a scarcity, but in terms of like, all right, maybe you have to hit that one metric, but do we need 10 of those stories? Or can we just think a little bit bigger about the stories that we might want to tell? I'm still waiting for somebody to sit down and have a good cup of coffee with Sylvia Fowles here in Portland. I dream of it. I've talked to multiple journalists. I'm like, please tell this story. Tell me what's going on with Sylvia here in Portland as a coach. Like, tell me all about that. And so there's stories to be told. And it don't have to be all doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be all the mess. It doesn't have to be all whatever the most controversial thing. We have to cover that. It has to be there. We can't run away from that. But what else? What are we missing? And so I like when people tell me about someone they're just learning about or really excited about. I love the rookies this season. They're all doing really different, very cool things. So more of that. How do you settle into a new city? What is Kelsey Plum going through? Like, I think about the logistics of like the whip around of like going somewhere else, playing a whole new team. You're like, is this my jersey? Like, what's going on? So I think about like, is someone telling the story? I've seen a couple of really cool kind of pieces of like, when you get traded mid-season, the mid-season trade deadline is just nuts to me. So I just think, I say all this to say, I like geeking out on all of it. I want to know about your tunnel fit, but I also want to know about your strategy for the game. And I think there's plenty of folks for that too. But the media literacy, to go back to your point, it's just down bad. It's just a part of it is like, there are so many journalists that work hard only for people to not want to read. And that's an issue for me as an educator. It's like, I got to help people get on board to be able to really enjoy the fruits of all these incredible journalists' labor.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had Sylvia Fowles on. She is always lovely. I love that she knits. She's just into so many different interests. Sylvia
She's into mortuary studies. Like, what?
Yeah.
What can't she do?
Such a fascinating story. Before we let you go, I do want to ask, your book is kind of about, your first line here is, as athletes compete in leagues around the world, elite women's basketball players continually adjust to new cultures, rules, and contracts. What we're also seeing now is a lot of players from overseas to us are now playing in the WNBA. We're seeing this boom of international talent, so that now that we're heading into the World Cup break, it feels like one of the first times where we know so many different players from other countries representing other countries, and especially France and all those players in New York really giving Team USA a run. I'm wondering if there's anything you want to talk about there with the growth of international players coming to the WNBA over the past couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, when I started this project, again, Sierra was kind of my guide. She had and I was just thinking about having to negotiate multiple contracts at once. That was kind of my brain of like, how do you do all of this in your 22? Like, what was I doing when I was 22? Definitely not that. And so I started there and I told her, when I get ready to write my dissertation, it would be great to like catch up. She was going to Naples. I was like already eating the pizza in my brain. I was like, this is gonna be great. And then when I ended up going, I hit her up and it was 2018. And I was like, okay, Italy, right? She's like, ooh, it's actually Russia this year. And I was like, oh. So I went to Russia. And then later up, I caught up with her in France. And I went to France a few times for basketball reasons. And France is really dynamic. The way that France loves on basketball is very cool. But I think when I started my first job, when I started at Oregon out of grad school, I was really amazed too at Oregon. I was starting in 2019. So this is the unfinished business season of Sabrina, Ruthie, and Satu. And I was thinking about how international that college team was, right? With both Satu and Niara being there. And so I think you start to realize people even at the college level, and then they go to the W, and then you're following multiple teams in that way. We can think about Paris, right, as a really exciting place. And there are a lot of former W players that are also playing internationally or representing national teams as well. Imani McGee-Stafford will be playing for Puerto Rico, for example. And so one of the things that I think is great, my plug for the FIBA World Cup, is that you're going to see so many folks that you love, and you're going to see really interesting, I love the FIBA style of play. And so you're going to see a lot of players who have international experience, who've played overseas, able to really adapt their game in a way that it's really doesn't work the same way on the men's side because they don't have the same relationship to global labor when it comes to having to go back and forth and translate your game, which is a lot of what my book is about, is how do you translate your game? How do you translate your finances? How do you understand yourself in this larger media ecosystem? The other side of this, I'll say, and just because of the LSU helmets there, they also create some sticky moments as we are currently experiencing.
Yes.
And I think LSU women's basketball is also indicative of what this exchange of basketball also tells us in this moment. It's not surprising. It's Kim Mulkey. What can we say? But I think that one of the things I think is instructive is where do these come into these larger geopolitical conversations? It can't all be, lovely roses. It's like any World Cup, right? And so I think it also shows us kind of where we are as a people, where we are as a global kind of entity. And basketball is really great for that. Soccer gets a lot of love. Football gets a lot of love. But I think basketball does a lot of that too, in terms of both bringing us together in particular ways, but also telling us what we're about. And so I love that about this break because it also kind of alerts people, kind of gives that tune up before we get to LA 28. And so I love this kind of way that this season's giving us everything. It's a little tapas platter of like, you want to know where we are as a country. You want to know how it's going globally. Like we're getting a little bit of everything happening in this space. And so I'm really excited about that. And I love this new kind of moment where we're having W players from other countries come over that didn't play in college, that are coming over internationally and being able to hold their own, which is really a testament to them because that's no joke. To make that transition from overseas EuroLeague ball to W is not easy. And so it really speaks to the talents of all these players. I'm thinking even where I am in Portland for the Fire, there's a lot of international representation. And it's coached in a very international way, given the head coach's kind of history. And so the Euro style of play isn't just something you go do in FIBA. It's also kind of permeating the style here, which I think is a really interesting thing I'm starting to watch for.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And like sports and politics are both intersections of culture. You can't have one without the other. We can have conversations of how they intersect, and it's okay to have that. I hope that this conversation has been an example to everyone that you can have the hard conversations. You can ask some of the hard conversations. As long as it's rooted in mutual respect, it doesn't have to get contentious. We can have a safe space with each other. Courtney Cox, we have taken up more than enough of your time. Thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for the conversation. You can see it over her shoulder. Her book, Double Crossover, Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball. Where can people find it if they're interested in learning more?
The book is published with the University of Illinois Press. You can find it on their website. You can find it anywhere. I love when people support independent bookstores. A lot of them will bring it to you. Bookshop, we love to see it. A great place to support independent bookstores because people still read and we still need readers. Please read, y'all.
Appreciate Courtney and joining us on the show and for all of her time. Hope that you all learned a little something, enjoyed the conversation that we had with her. Let's look ahead to the WNBA schedule. Just a couple of games before the 2026 FIBA World Cup begins, and we have that 2-week World Cup break. On Thursday, we've got Velks and Liberty, couple of playoff teams. And then on Sunday, we've got the Lynx and the Dream. Lynx are trying to lock up that #1 overall seed in the WNBA postseason. Cass, what are you going to be looking for in these games?
The Valkyries' defense is always so impressive. I have a fun time watching them do that. And then the Liberty, like Leonie Fevich coming back, can they climb the rankings? Like, is this actually kind of the key to what they've been missing? It's just been being without Leo. Those are two teams that are very long, can play very big. So you'll see that there. But when it comes to Lynx versus Dream, I'm looking primarily at, is Courtney Williams still out? What is that injury? How long might she be out? Will the World Cup help with that rest? And can Olivia Miles bounce back from, not a great game? Cheryl Reeve talked about she wants those kinds of games for her rookie to, figure it out, to kind of problem solve in real time or afterward. I think it's important that they have it now. It's also an interesting point. This is a rookie. She is certainly in MVP conversation. She's had an incredible year, but we are entering the playoffs. And while they do say that you are no longer a rookie by the time you enter the playoffs, it will be her first postseason. What does that look like and how does that affect her? So how does she bounce back from that game the other night in these games moving forward?
I'm so glad you brought that up about what Cheryl Reeve said about, learning experiences from maybe not your best games. We've heard that from Asia Wilson so many times, that they kind of like it when they get their butts kicked because it's a learning opportunity. We hear that from Don Seeley, from Gino Auriemma at the college level. But those are coaches that have been coaching for a really long time. And that's Asia Wilson that has been playing in this league at a very high level for a very long time. It does take growth and maturity and time to get into that mindset of, hey, bad games are learning opportunities and learning experiences. I'm not saying that Olivia Miles is not in that mindset. I'm not saying that Olivia Miles can't learn from a down game, but this will be kind of a test, a rookie test for somebody that's new to, I've played a really long season. We still have a really long way to go, and we still have the grind of the postseason ahead of us. So all learning experiences for Olivia Miles in her rookie season. We will be back next week. I mentioned it earlier in the show, but we're going to do a full World Cup breakdown. What you need to know, how this could impact the rest of the WNBA season going into the postseason. Just some trends that we've kind of picked up on in international basketball. So we'll get into all of that, a full primer for the World Cup coming up on next week's edition of Hoops 360. She is Cassandra Negley. You can find all of her breakdown on the WNBA on yahoosports.com. I'm Caroline Fenton. You can find me on Yahoo Sports Daily every morning from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern on the Yahoo Sports Network. We will see you next week.